I'm 32, financially independent, and I own the kind of quiet I used to think only existed in library posters and hotel lobbies. I live alone in a small apartment I paid for in cash because the idea of a mortgage feels like inviting someone to audit my life. I work in data for a logistics company, boring to most people, satisfying to me. Systems make sense. Inputs, outputs, constraints, accountability. Numbers don't pretend to love you while keeping a tab. That's the part of my life I lead with now. Stability, control, proof I'm not a debt. But if you've ever wandered into our / raised by narcissists or our / true off my chest, you already know there's usually a bill of origin. Mine came with a line item for everything under the roof over your head. My parents raised me on the language of invoices. Not rules, not values, balances. Do you know how much that cost? Was the chorus line to every memory. Milk? $3 and change. Soccer cleats? Put it on your ledger. The ledger wasn't a metaphor. There was an actual binder. A 3-ring with plastic sleeves for receipts, tabs labeled food, clothes, school, and a section just called miscellaneous life. The binder lived on the microwave like a well-fed pet, always slightly warm, always humming with what I owed. My father ran it like a small business. He used a ballpoint that left deep grooves and a kind of labored handwriting that made every number look heavy. My mother matched his energy with refrigerator charts, the kind for chores and gold stars, but ours had dollar signs. If I pulled B's instead of A's, a passive-aggressive sticky note appeared. Scholarship money is money saved, smiley face. If I forgot to bring in the mail, another note. Wasted time equals wasted money. Smiley faces came with teeth. Dinner was when the bills were read out loud. He'd unfold a crinkled energy statement like a priest with scripture. We used 732 kilowatt hours this month. That's higher than last August. Wonder why? He'd look at me. I'd look at my plate. My mother would sigh, dramatic, eyes pressed shut as if charging for the performance by the minute. Hot showers aren't free, she'd say, like she was introducing a fun fact. Neither is that shampoo you like. You learn not to ask for things when every request is an item to be stapled into your future. But life supplies its own inventory. Field trips, class pictures, the $10 fee for the school plays costume t-shirt. The one I didn't even want to be in because who wants to be in a performance when your home is already a stage? I remember the permission slip sitting on the table. My mother picked it up, skimmed, tapped the box that said payment attached. She didn't even look at me when she said, "Put it on your ledger." My father chuckled like it was a joke worn smooth from use. "Don't forget the interest," he said. It wasn't a real interest rate. It was a performance. At least, that's what I told myself, so I wouldn't cry into mashed potatoes. They liked to say, "We gave you life." It wasn't a sentimental line. It was a contractual opening. "We gave you life," my father would say. "And we're not asking for everything back, just what's fair." My mother preferred rehearsed adages. Nothing in life is free. There's no such thing as a free lunch. People need to learn appreciation. The word appreciation did a lot of work in our house. It meant gratitude. It also meant market value. I found out later that normal parents buy school supplies without calculating the ROI on a set of crayons. Back then, the only normal I knew was a kitchen table where price tags could be weaponized. One afternoon, I came home with a permission slip for a science museum trip. The bus fee was $12. I'd written a note to myself, "Ask Mom maybe?" like I was filing an internal request. She was sitting on the couch, flipping through a catalog and circling things with a red pen she never used to grade me, only to plan purchases. I stood there until my feet hurt. "Spit it out," she said, not unkind, but tired. I handed her the slip. She read it, pursed her lips. $12 for a bus ride and a bunch of dusty bones. She shook her head. "We already pay taxes." Then she softened like a person who loves the story of herself. "We'll cover it," she said, decisive, generous. "Put it on your ledger." I nodded and said thank you like she was donating a kidney. The ledger had a column for notes. Sometimes it read shoes, outgrew the last pair too quickly. Sometimes it was dentist, cavity caused by snacks. Once it was ER visit, clumsiness, with a question mark that felt like a wagging finger. I got pneumonia when I was 9. The hospital room had a machine with a lazy heartbeat and a window that showed the backs of other buildings. It smelled like plastic and lemon. I remember my mother at the foot of the bed, arms crossed, telling the nurse, He'll eat the hospital food. No special menu. We're already paying for the room. My father stood in the corner like a manager doing a surprise inspection, reading the chart, then the brochure on understanding your bill. Later, at dinner, he announced the number the way people announce birthdays. $2,461.35. He sliced the meatloaf with surgical care. That's a lot of overtime. My mother rested her hand on his arm. Then she looked at me. Be careful, sweetie. Next time, breathe smarter. She laughed. I laughed, too, because air had already become expensive. I grew up fluent in guilt math. You start tallying your own existence to make it easier for everyone. You learn to minimize your footprint the way people talk about climate change. Showers under 5 minutes. Layers instead of heat. The good cereal stays closed until Saturday because it cost more than the other box. You become a ghost in your own home, drifting between, do you know what water costs? And we're not made of money, like those are oil and you're the rag. When I was 12, I got a birthday card with a crisp 20 in it from my grandmother, my mother's mother, who liked me but adored my mother more. My father plucked the bill from the card before I finished the sentence. We'll hold on to this, he said. Savings. My mother added, do you want to learn about compounding interest? And she said it like she was offering candy. The 20 went into a white envelope labeled with my name and a date. It lived in a drawer with other envelopes labeled car, vacation, Christmas. Later, when I asked to buy a paperback from the bookstore, the first time I wanted to spend my money, my father opened the drawer, weighed the envelope in his palm, and shook his head. You haven't earned the right to dip into savings. He pinched the corner of the envelope and slid it back like I had missed a magic trick. Close that drawer. That's for when we really need it. Ni was their word. One was mine. One was always vulgar at our house. Another scene, because these stories only sound like exaggerations until you stack them. 8th grade. A winter coat in a sale bin. The kind with a zipper that didn't fight you and a hood that felt like a soft helmet. My mother turned the tag over and did that accountant squint, even though she wasn't an accountant. We can do better at the thrift store. My father checked my sleeve, tugged it so the cuff covered my wrist. You'll grow, he said like it was a threat. That's more expenses. Can you slow down? He smiled. Joking, but not. We went home without the coat. That winter, I carried an umbrella from room to room, as if that could protect me from anything but weather. Before anyone says, that's just frugal, here's the part that nailed it to the wall. They called it a debt. Not a metaphor. A formal declaration. We're investing in you, my father said. One day, you'll pay it back. He said it at holidays, in front of family. Raising a son is expensive, he'd say with a laugh that wanted witnesses. My mother poured coffee and added, we'll send the invoice when he lands his big job. Right, honey? She'd kiss my hair. Everyone chuckled. I learned to smile in a way that didn't show teeth. In high school, when counselors talked about college, my parents turned into loan officers. What's the starting salary for that major? My father asked, fingers steepled. Don't pick something soft. We're not financing poetry. My mother cut brochures into confetti. State school or community college. No sense in paying for a name on a sweatshirt. If I looked tired from part-time shifts bagging groceries, my father would pat my shoulder like he was calibrating a machine. Good practice, he'd say. When you're older, you'll be busy paying us back. I started working at 14 because they told me I should contribute. Rent. My mother called it, though she said it with a smile, so it sounded like a life lesson and not a bill. $50 a week. Teaches you the value of money. She put the cash into the binder's income sleeve. I asked what it was for. She said household expenses and kissed the top of my head. In the car, after my first shift, my father asked if I'd clock out on time or steal from your employer. He always ran the moral math alongside the financial math, like ethics and debt were the same spreadsheet. I wanted to argue they weren't, but I'd learned the cost of being right. It's weird how bodies remember even what minds try to forget. In my first apartment, years later, before furniture, I put the electric bill on the counter and my hands shook. Not because I couldn't pay, because I was waiting for a voice to read the number out loud. Because I expected a performance. Because somewhere, a plastic sleeve was waiting for a receipt with my name on it, and I'd forgotten how to live without keeping score. But I'm getting ahead of myself. The point is, I was raised like a ledger entry. Not a child, a project with a potential return. When love wears that kind of uniform, Every hug feels like a contract signing. Here's one last memory from that house. I was 16, had the flu, the real kind with heat behind the eyes. I skipped school, lay on the couch under an Afghan that smelled like cedar. My mother came in, set down a grocery bag, and held up a thermometer like a sheriff with a warrant. 101, she said, sking. She took out 2 bottles, generic cough syrup, store brand acetaminophen, and set them on the table very carefully. These weren't on sale, she said. Just so you know. My father came home early, stood in the doorway, and looked at me the way people check the oven light. Get better fast, he said. We don't have time for this. Later, when I drifted awake, I heard paper sliding into plastic. The binder inhaled my sickness and filed it under costs. If you're wondering whether they ever said the other sentences, we're proud of you. That's our job. You don't owe us anything. The answer is no. At least, not in a way that didn't end with a decimal. I left as soon as I legally could. For now, this is the opening balance. This is me, at 32, with a quiet apartment and a loud past, finally counting for myself. I left 2 weeks after my 18th birthday. Not dramatic. No slammed doors, no midnight escape. It was a Thursday. I had a backpack, a duffel bag, and a folded note on the kitchen table because I didn't trust my voice not to crack. Thank you for everything. I wrote, and even then the phrase felt like signing a receipt. My father was at work. My mother was at the grocery store, circled items on her list like they were targets. I took one last look at the binder on the microwave, imagined slipping myself out of it like a receipt you don't need anymore, and walked out. I moved into a basement room in a split-level house with a co-worker from the grocery store. Her name was Tasha. She was 23, had a kid, and a laugh that sounded like it had fought through a lot to exist. The room had concrete floors and a window that stared at soil and 2 anemic tufts of grass. I paid $350 a month, cash. My first night there, I lay on a futon that sloped toward the floor and listened to the boiler pop, like someone dropping pebbles down a pipe. It was the best sleep I'd had in years. Work was overnight stocking. Blue polo, name tag, the smell of cardboard and bleach in my hair even after I showered. I learned the rhythm of pallets and box cutters, of making a wall of cereal at 3 in the morning while a local AM station played oldies like the past was still taking requests. I like the predictability. You slice, you shelve, you face the boxes so the fronts look crisp. No one reads out a bill at the end of the aisle. You just clock out. Tasha taught me how to make food that stretched. Rice with a fried egg, a pot of beans that lasted the week, chicken thighs instead of breasts. She said, flavor is cheap if you know where to look, and sprinkled paprika like it was a magic trick. Sometimes her kid, Jaden, would wander downstairs in footy pajamas at 6 a.m., blinking at me like I was a weird dream. I'd pour him cereal, and he'd tell me about cartoons in precise detail. It felt like listening to a warm radio station. The first time I paid an electric bill, my hands didn't shake. I opened it at the small plastic table Tasha had inherited from an aunt, stared at the number, $46.13, and said out loud, "Okay." I wrote the check. No performance. The quiet felt like stepping off a treadmill that never turned off at home. I sat back and realized I could hear birds outside, muffled by dirt. I enrolled in community college because it was cheap and because if I didn't, my parents would crow that I'd wasted potential. I picked general ed classes that didn't require expensive lab fees. I took Intro to Programming because the professor put the syllabus online and said the textbook was recommended, not required. It turned out I was good at thinking in boxes and arrows. Loops felt like honest repetitions. Conditions felt like rules that actually applied to everyone who met them. No smiley faces. My schedule was absurd. Stocking from 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Nap, class from 10 a.m. to noon. Then librarian shifts in the campus computer lab because they let me do homework between answering, "Why won't this print?" and "What's my password?" I ate a lot of vending machine peanut butter crackers and apples I bought in bulk. I kept a tiny spreadsheet of every dollar, rent, phone, bus pass, instant coffee, soap. The spreadsheet didn't judge me. It just told me the truth. My parents called once a week for the first month. Sunday afternoons. My mother opened with an inventory of her week, sales, neighbor gossip, a relative's knee surgery, and then in the lull she'd aim. "So, do you have a plan to start paying us back?" She said it like asking if I'd remembered to wear sunscreen. My father didn't bother with the preamble. When are you sending something? The first time he asked, I thought he meant letters. I've been busy with work and class, I said. He exhaled into the phone in that disappointed teacher way. Money, he said. We talked about this. You're an adult now. I'm barely covering rent, I told him. Can we revisit this when I'm not living on ramen? You're living under your own roof now, he said. You should understand costs. Maybe the worst part is I did understand. I could see their mortgage in my head, the grocery bills, the gas. Guilt rises like floodwater even when the forecast is wrong. For a week I considered sending them $50 just to stop the calls. Tasha found me staring at my checking account on an ancient laptop that whined. You look like you're trying to will it to double, she said, leaning on the doorframe. My parents want money, I said. They always said I owed them. Now they're collecting. She whistled, a low, sympathetic note. You can't pour from an empty cup, she said. Then she grinned. Also, they sound like the type who'd invoice you for the cup. I laughed, the kind of laugh that loosens something in your ribs. I didn't send the $50. The calls got meaner. I guess you don't appreciate what we sacrificed, my mother said one week. Other kids send money home, my father added. We didn't raise you to be selfish. I kept my voice level. I'm working and studying, I said. I'll pay my own bills first. My mother made a wounded sound. We don't even want much, she said. Just a token. The token would be the first peg in a rack. I could see the hooks waiting. I switched to texts. Busy at work. Talk later. In class. On the bus. The truth helped. The distance helped more. I learned that if I answered every other time, they weaponized the gap. If I answered never, they ran out of fuel faster than my anxiety predicted. Silence is an engine that stalls if you don't feed it. I did 2 years at community, then transferred to a state school with a commuter campus, kept working nights, and fell into data because my mentor in the lab said, "You're good at untangling messes." I got an internship at a small logistics firm that paid $15 an hour and let me write scripts to clean up CSVs that looked like they'd been through a war. It felt like someone had finally handed me a broom that fit my hand. Before the internship, I worked a second job at a diner on weekends. Greasy spoon, counter with cracked red stools, pie under plastic domes. The owner, Vic, ran it like a ship, stern, fair, always in motion. On my first Saturday, he handed me a stack of plates and said, "Smile with your eyes, kid. Your mouth lies when you're tired." The regulars tipped in singles and nickels. A man named Frank told me the same story about his Buick every Sunday, like it was a ritual that kept the car running. I learned to refill coffee before the cup was half empty, to notice when a person needed quiet more than a joke. One slow afternoon, I stood with my back against the swinging kitchen door, staring at the dry erase board where Vic wrote the day's specials and the cost of eggs in big numbers like a weather report. "You spacing out or praying?" he asked, wiping his hands on his apron. "Doing the math on my life," I said, trying to figure out how to make it add up. He nodded like I'd said something he recognized. "It never adds up," he said. "You just keep the leaks small." I kept the leaks small. I learned to fix the hem on my pants with a hotel sewing kit. I learned that buying a decent pair of shoes was cheaper than replacing cheap ones every 3 months. I learned that sleep was a currency, and I traded it too often. On nights when the world went fuzzy, I'd walk to the 24-hour laundromat, sit in the hum, and read Python documentation until my eyes felt like they were being ironed. The machines became white noise strong enough to drown out the old chorus in my head. Cost, cost, cost. There were moments of grace that didn't look like much from the outside. A professor slid my project back to me with "elegant" written in the margin. Tasha's kid drew a crayon picture of me, stick figure with giant glasses, and wrote, "Nice." Vic snuck me a slice of pie at the end of a 12-hour day and said, "Don't tell the IRS." I put those moments in a mental binder separate from the one I grew up with, plastic sleeves filled with proof that not everything had to be measured in dollars. My parents showed up once at the diner. It was a Sunday, the after-church rush. I was carrying a tray of pancakes and bacon that smelled like a commercial. I saw them the way you see a ghost, first as a trick of the light, then as a certainty that stops your breath. My mother in her good coat. My father with his default expression of managerial disappointment. They slid into a booth like they owned it. I walked over because not walking over would be a bigger scene. "Hi," I said, voice steady enough to balance plates on. "We thought we'd surprise you," my mother said. ice traveling over my apron, the cracked tile, the bus tub. See how our hardworking boy is doing. My father scanned the menu like it had a ledger at the back. You get a discount here, he asked, like that would reassure him I wasn't spilling profit. I took their order, 2 coffees, eggs over easy, rye toast, bacon extra crisp. My hands remembered how to do the job even as my brain flashed images. The binder, the sticky notes, the way my mother had held up a thermometer like evidence. When I set their plates down, my father pressed his finger into the toast to test for warmth. So, he said, when can we expect something? It was between how's your day and pass the salt. My mother didn't look at me when she added, we've been patient. I felt the answer rise in me like a tide. Not the shouted teenage version. Something colder. You can expect me to do what I can when I can, I said. Right now, that's keeping a roof over my head. He chewed. He nodded like a judge. We'll keep a tab, he said. He said it lightly, but I watched him reach for the napkin dispenser like he might pull a pen and start writing. I backed away before I threw up the pie I hadn't eaten. In the kitchen, Vic caught my face and said, you okay? He had a way of asking that made it not rhetorical. My parents, I said, gesturing toward the dining room with my chin. They think I owe them. He didn't say, every kid owes their parents, which is what I was trained to expect. He said, what do you think? I think if I treat love like a bill, I'll spend my whole life paying with coins that never add up. He grunted, approving. Good. Get them their check fast. Some customers don't need refills. I dropped the check without making eye contact. My mother put a 20 in the folder and tapped it twice like sealing an envelope. No tip. We're your family, she said as they stood. Don't forget that. I won't, I said. I didn't add what I meant. I won't forget any of it. That night, at 3 in the morning, shelving soup cans under fluorescent lights, I decided on a new rule. If they wanted to treat everything like a transaction, I'd meet them there, on my terms, on my timeline. I didn't know the number yet, but I knew there would be one, and I knew that when I landed on it, it would be exact. No interest, no smiley faces, just a clean line through a balance. It took years to get to the place where I could make that promise real. In the meantime, I worked and studied and let my life grow away from theirs like a vine, choosing its own fence. I made friends who didn't keep score. I learned to cook one dish really well, garlic lemon chicken thighs. Thanks, Tasha. I discovered I liked the low piano of late-night rain on concrete. I paid on time. I saved. I slept sometimes. The struggle wasn't glamorous. It was stacks of folded uniform shirts and bus transfers and the way cold air bites when you leave class after dark. It was saying no to small temptations so I could say yes to the bigger thing I couldn't name yet. It was choosing not to pick up when my phone lit with Mom or Dad, and then taking a deep breath that felt like opening a window in February. It was realizing that the quiet I wanted wasn't the kind they use in commercials. It was the kind you earn by making sure no one has a claim on you. Some nights I'd stand in the basement, look at that window staring into dirt, and imagine sunlight on the other side anyway. I pictured a different apartment, one upstairs, with a real view. I pictured a job where the numbers were mine, where systems obeyed logic, where the only tallies were the ones I chose. And somewhere in that imagined room sat a small white envelope with a number inside, calculated to the cent, not as proof that they were right, but as a key. Not moral, not sentimental, just math that opened a door. I was 24 the first time I walked into an office building with a badge that unlocked a door instead of just clocking me in. Logistics firm, mid-sized, nondescript exterior. Beige carpet, buzzing fluorescents, fake plants in the lobby. To most people, it was just another office park box in the suburbs. To me, it was proof that my years of ramen, graveyard shifts, and class schedules printed on scrap paper had actually led somewhere. The job started with an internship. They gave me a cubicle near the back, a desk that wobbled if I leaned on it, and a computer so slow it wheezed when I opened Excel. My first assignment was cleaning up a client's shipping data, which looked like someone had sneezed numbers onto a spreadsheet. I wrote a script that trimmed, split, and reorganized it in a few hours. My manager leaned over my cubicle wall, eyebrows raised. You did all this already? I nodded, nervous. He whistled low. You just saved me 3 days. He slapped the cube wall like it was a sturdy horse. Kid, you might be onto something. That was the first time work felt like more than survival. I wasn't just scraping by, I was building something. The firm extended my internship, then hired me full-time after graduation. Salary, benefits, health insurance that didn't feel like a luxury. The first paycheck hit my account, and I stared at the number, bigger than anything I'd seen before. I didn't run out and buy something shiny. I paid rent a month ahead. I stocked my fridge with groceries that didn't come in bulk packs of noodles. I bought myself a decent pair of noise-canceling headphones. That night, I sat on my futon, listening to music without hearing the neighbor's TV bleed through, and thought, this is mine. The calls from my parents hadn't stopped during those years of scraping by. If anything, they'd grown more pointed. My father liked to say, now that you're educated, you should understand compound obligations. My mother would sigh about kids these days forgetting who raised them. I learned to keep responses short. I'm busy. I can't talk right now. Work deadline. They didn't know my actual salary, but I'm sure they assumed it was plenty. To them, every dollar I made was a chip they'd already cashed. I started saving aggressively. At first, just a few hundred a month into a high-yield account. Then more, as promotions came and side gigs rolled in. I freelanced on weekends, building databases for small businesses that had been using paper invoices since the 80s. I said yes to projects, to overtime, to anything that meant more control over my future. I wasn't aiming at wealth yet. I was aiming at freedom. Freedom from calls, freedom from ledgers, freedom from that damn binder still sitting on the microwave back at their house. Independence wasn't just financial. It was emotional muscle I had to grow on purpose. The first time I went no contact for a month, my chest felt tight every day. I'd picture my father scowling at a phone bill, my mother telling relatives I'd abandoned them. Guilt is a parasite that knows all the shortcuts to your brain. But the longer I didn't answer, the more I realized nothing catastrophic happened. The world didn't tilt off its axis. I wasn't arrested for unpaid debts. Their voices only lived in my head when I let them. At 26, I moved into a one-bedroom apartment with actual sunlight. Not dirt level, not shared, not borrowed. Mine. The first morning, I made coffee and drank it standing at the window, looking out at a row of brick buildings and a maple tree just starting to turn orange. The air smelled like city dust and roasted beans, and I swear it was the most luxurious scent I'd ever inhaled. No one knocked on the door to read me a bill. No one left sticky notes about wasted hot water. I showered as long as I wanted. I even bought the expensive shampoo, citrus and mint, $10 a bottle. Every squeeze felt like rebellion. Friends filtered into my life, too. Not the transactional kind, but the ones who didn't keep score. A coworker named Luis introduced me to bouldering. Cheap gym membership, he said. Also, rocks don't talk back. A neighbor invited me to her weekly trivia night at a dive bar. I joined, discovered I was good at the random facts round, and laughed harder than I had in years when our team won a pitcher of cheap beer. I learned what it felt like to spend time with people without secretly calculating what it might cost later. Of course, my parents sniffed around. They'd call and ask questions that weren't really questions. So, what's your rent? How much do you make now? Are you investing? My mother once asked for my bank's name. Just curious, she said, her voice sugar-sweet. I dodged, changed the subject, hung up early. Eventually, I stopped giving them anything real. Work's fine. The apartment's fine. I'm fine. The less detail I gave, the fewer hooks they had to hang demands on. They did try to guilt-trip me through extended family. An aunt called to say, your parents mentioned you're doing well. They're so proud. But also, they sacrificed a lot. I bit my tongue until it bled. Proud wasn't the word they'd ever used to my face. But I just said, I'm working on building stability, and changed the subject. It wasn't worth correcting the narrative. I knew the truth. That was enough. At work, I climbed the ladder fast. Senior analyst by 28, team lead by 30. The company wasn't glamorous, but it was steady, profitable, expanding. I bought index funds instead of flashy cars. I maxed out my retirement accounts. My spreadsheet, the one I built for myself, became a comfort, not a weapon. Each line item wasn't proof of guilt. It was proof of growth. Rent, savings, insurance, coffee, climbing gym. It told a story where I wasn't the burden, I was the author. Some nights, I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling fan spin, and feel the ghost of that old binder hovering. In those moments, I made myself a promise. One day, I'd pay them back. Not in gratitude. Not in love. In math. Cold, clean, undeniable math. Down to the cent. and then I'd be free. The idea took root quietly at first. I started collecting information the way someone prepares for a long trip. Government reports on the cost of raising a child, average expenses per year, inflation calculators, old notes I remembered seeing in the binder. If they wanted to frame love as a debt, then I'd repay it in the most literal way possible. Not a penny more, not a penny less. By 31, I had enough saved that the thought wasn't fantasy anymore. My net worth crossed six figures. My bills were paid months ahead. My life, for the first time, felt insulated from crisis. That's when the idea hardened from a daydream into a plan. I wasn't angry anymore. That surprised me. The younger me imagined screaming, slamming the binder shut in their faces, demanding apologies that would never come. But the older me felt something colder, steadier. I didn't want apologies. I didn't want explanations. I wanted a transaction. Clean, final, irreversible. They'd get their debt. I'd get my freedom. Done. The independence I'd carved out gave me the space to think like that without spiraling. I could look at my past without drowning in it. I could look at my future without hearing my father's voice tallying costs. The quiet in my apartment was real now, not fragile. It wasn't borrowed. It wasn't conditional. It was mine. And in that quiet, the plan began to take shape. Step by step, line by line. Exactly how much it cost them to raise me. Exactly how much I'd pay back. Exactly how I'd end it. That's part 4. But before I get there, you need to understand. Independence wasn't a single leap. It was 1,000 small steps, each one away from the microwave binder, toward a life where love wasn't an invoice. A life where I could choose to pay my parents back not out of obligation, but out of the ultimate act of defiance, giving them exactly what they demanded and nothing more. By the time I turned 31, I had enough distance from my parents to finally breathe without their voices trailing in the air behind me. Enough money in the bank, too, that I didn't check my account before buying groceries or hesitate over whether I could afford to grab a cab instead of waiting for the bus at midnight. That kind of stability doesn't just make life easier, it gives you the luxury of clarity. And clarity, for me, meant realizing it was time to settle the score. The idea had been simmering for years, pay them back, down to the cent. But it wasn't until then that I understood I could actually do it. Not as a fantasy, not as a vague someday, but as a precise, calculated action. If they wanted to turn parenthood into an invoice, then fine. I'd pay the bill. I'd pay it with such accuracy that it would close the ledger forever. I started with the binder. I didn't have it. Obviously, it was still in their kitchen, probably bloated with decades of receipts like some grotesque family scrapbook. But I remembered enough details. I'd seen those pages hundreds of times. Grocery totals, dentist bills, school fees, utility numbers scribbled in my father's heavy handwriting. I couldn't replicate it exactly, but I didn't need to. All I needed was to reconstruct the skeleton of it and hang the numbers on. So I built a spreadsheet. I named the first tab Ledger, Childhood. The cells looked sterile, clinical, like they belonged in a corporate budget report. That was the point. Childhood, reduced to cells and formulas. Their worldview, reflected back. I pulled up USDA reports on the average cost of raising a child by decade. The Department of Agriculture has been tracking that since the 60s, breaking it down into categories: housing, food, healthcare, education, clothing, transportation, miscellaneous. Exactly the kind of categories my father used to scrawl on his paper tabs. The reports were free online. Numbers, adjusted for inflation, waiting for someone like me to pick them apart. I cross-referenced everything with inflation calculators. What did a gallon of milk cost in 1996? What about rent in our zip code in 2001? I remembered enough prices from overhearing my parents at the kitchen table to plug in estimates where data didn't exist. Sometimes, I overcalculated deliberately, rounded up instead of down. Because when the transfer finally hit, I wanted there to be no argument. No wiggle room. No way for them to come back and claim I shorted them. It was meticulous, almost meditative. Line by line, year by year. Birth to 18. Hospital bills, formula, daycare, school supplies, doctor visits. I gave myself a column for parent notes, little jabs from memory that fit the data. Age 6, field trip, $12. Put it on your ledger. Age 9, ER visit, pneumonia, $2,461. 35, breathe smarter next time. Age 14, rent contribution, $50 per week, 6 months. Household expenses. That last one I marked in red because I was already paying them at 14, which meant, technically, they owed me. But I didn't subtract it. I didn't subtract anything. I wanted no argument. As I worked, I felt something loosen in my chest. It wasn't rage. It wasn't grief. It was focus. I realized I didn't even care about the exact number in the end. What mattered was the act of tallying, the discipline of turning their manipulation into something finite, countable, and therefore escapable. By the time I finished the first draft, the spreadsheet was 17 tabs long. Each year had its own sheet. Totals rolled up into a neat pivot table. Grand total at the bottom, $184,326. 17. That number hit me harder than I expected. It wasn't just a sum. It was my entire childhood, priced like inventory. But instead of flinching, I stared at it for a long time and whispered, fine, because that number meant freedom. The next step was confirming I could move that much in one go. I'd been careful with my money, savings, investments, a rainy day fund. I wasn't rich by tech standards, but I was solid. That $184,000 was a heavy lift, but it wouldn't sink me. I'd planned for years without even realizing it. Always saving more than I spent. Always cautious. My emergency fund could cover a year's expenses. My portfolio was diversified. I could afford to drop this hammer and keep walking. I rehearsed the logistics like a military operation. Which account to transfer from? What bank details I needed? How to make sure the memo field carried exactly the right message. No extra words. No apologies. Just 2 words. Debt repaid. I thought about writing a letter, something long and scathing, laying out every memory, every manipulation, every scar. But when I imagined them reading it, I knew exactly how it would play out. My father would smirk, call it dramatic. My mother would sigh, say I was misunderstanding again. They'd twist every sentence into proof that I was still playing their game. But numbers? Numbers can't be twisted. Money in their account with those 2 words in the memo field. That was unarguable. It would say everything and nothing at once. I practiced in my head what it would feel like after. I pictured myself clicking Submit Transfer, sitting back in my chair, the screen confirming it had gone through. I pictured blocking their numbers, emails, social media. Not in anger, not in a burst of adrenaline, but calmly, like closing the cover on a book I'd finished. The thought calmed me like nothing else had. I didn't tell anyone at first. Not coworkers, not friends, not even Tasha, who I still caught up with every few months, her kid taller now, cracking jokes like a mini version of her. This plan was mine. Too sharp, too personal to risk softening with someone else's take. Still, in quiet moments, I tested the idea with hypotheticals. At trivia night, someone asked, "What's the most expensive thing you've ever bought?" A teammate said a car. Another said student loans. I sipped my beer and thought, my freedom. Price, $184,326. 17. At work, when I automated a client's billing system, shaving hours off their process, my manager said, "Clean work, efficient, leaves no room for error." I nodded, thinking, that's exactly what I'm building too. The planning stage lasted months, not because I hesitated, but because I wanted to be meticulous. I wanted the timing to feel right. I wanted no loose ends. I tightened my finances, triple-checked my accounts, rehearsed the steps until I could do them with my eyes closed. Sometimes, late at night, I'd open the spreadsheet and just stare at the total. Not with bitterness anymore. With certainty. With a sense of inevitability. Like the final chapter of a long, messy book was already printed, I just had to turn the page. When people say revenge is best served cold, they usually mean spite. But for me, cold meant clarity. No heat left. Just precision. And when the day finally came, it wasn't a dramatic drum roll. It was a quiet morning, coffee on my desk, spreadsheet open, their bank info typed carefully into the transfer form. My finger hovered over the button, not trembling, just steady. I clicked. The confirmation popped up. The balance dropped. The number disappeared from my screen and reappeared in theirs. The ledger closed. Memo line, debt repaid. Then, one by one, I blocked them everywhere. Phone, email, social media, even extended family who might try to reach out on their behalf. Silence fell over my life like fresh snow, soft, heavy, clean. And for the first time in 32 years, I felt like I didn't owe anyone anything. The morning I finally did it wasn't a thunderstorm. No cinematic background score, no dramatic cracking of the sky. It was Wednesday, gray and ordinary, the kind of day that felt like any other. That was the point, I think. I wanted it to be normal. I wanted to prove to myself that ending decades of manipulation could feel as calm as paying a phone bill. I woke up at 6, not from an alarm, but from the habit of years spent juggling work and school. Made coffee, Ethiopian beans, fresh ground, splash of oat milk. My apartment was still, the hum of the fridge the only sound. I sat at my desk, opened my laptop, and pulled up the spreadsheet one last time. $184,326. 17. That number sat at the bottom like a period. 18 years distilled into digits. Food, clothes, rent, utilities, medicine, field trips, sports gear. The whole theater of raising a child priced out like an inventory list. Their ledger, reborn in my language. I logged into my bank. My fingers hovered, typing in their account number. I'd had it for years. My mother once begged me to help her set up online bill pay when she was too tired to figure it out. I remembered sitting in that kitchen, her leaning over me, binder on the microwave, while she muttered, "You'll need this kind of practice when you're paying us back." She'd smiled at the end, but it wasn't a joke. Now, here I was, giving them exactly what they'd always demanded. I typed slowly, carefully. Account number. Routing number. Amount. 184,326. 17. In the memo line, I wrote, "Debt repaid." That was all. No love, no thanks, no finally. Just the transaction, as clinical as they'd always made it. I stared at the screen. The cursor blinked next to the numbers like a metronome, steady, patient. I thought about how many times I'd pictured this moment. In high school, when I forked over $50 of grocery bagging wages for rent. In college, when I microwaved stale noodles while they called to remind me I owed them. At the diner, when my father pressed his thumb into toast and asked, "When can we expect something?" This was the answer. I clicked submit. The screen blinked. A green checkmark appeared. Your transfer has been scheduled. My account dipped. Their account swelled. Just like that, the ledger balanced. I sat back in my chair, exhaled slow. Not a sob, not a laugh. Just air, leaving my lungs like it had been stored up for years. The urge to call someone hit me for a second. Luis, maybe, or Tasha. To tell them, I did it, I finally did it. But I didn't. This wasn't something for an audience. This wasn't about anyone else's reaction. It was mine. My silence, my closure. Instead, I opened my phone. Blocked their numbers. One by one. Block contact. Confirm. Block their emails. Block them on social media. The accounts I never posted to, but they occasionally used to send comments dripping with pride that always carried an undertone of "don't forget what you owe." Even blocked my aunt, my uncle, the cousins who might try to relay a message. The world went quiet. It was almost disorienting at first. For so long, I'd lived with the background buzz of them. Calls, guilt, demands, invoices disguised as parental advice. Even when I ignored them, they were there, lurking in missed calls and half-read texts. Now nothing. I got up, poured myself another cup of coffee, and stood by the window. Outside, the city was waking. A man walking his dog, a woman jogging with earbuds, kids clattering toward the bus stop. All normal, all ordinary. None of them knew that inside this apartment, a 32-year-old man had just severed the last tie binding him to a ledger he never signed up for. I thought I'd feel triumph, a swelling, cinematic rush. Instead, what I felt was stillness. Like a storm had passed, and the air was heavy but clean. I left for work like any other day. Took the train, earbuds in, a podcast humming facts about something irrelevant. At the office, I answered emails, built queries, joined meetings. No one knew anything had shifted, but under the surface, everything had. Around noon, my phone buzzed. For a split second, my stomach nodded, old reflex. But the number didn't show up. Just a notification, block call attempt. Then another. Then another. My parents, discovering the deposit. Discovering the memo line. Discovering they couldn't reach me. I turned the phone over, face down on my desk, and went back to work. At 5, I rode home, stopped at the corner store, bought myself a decent bottle of whiskey. Not to celebrate in a wild way, just to mark the moment. At home, I poured one glass, neat, amber liquid catching the light. I raised it toward the spreadsheet on my laptop screen. To closure, I said quietly. Then I closed the file. I didn't delete it. Some things deserve to remain as proof, but I didn't need to stare at it anymore. The next morning, I woke up lighter. Not euphoric, not giddy. Just lighter. The way you feel when you finally unpack the last moving box and realize you're home. I checked my email out of habit. No new messages from them, because there couldn't be. The silence was intact. I made breakfast, eggs and toast with actual butter, and caught myself smiling at how mundane it felt. Freedom didn't need fireworks. Freedom was eating in peace. That weekend, I met friends at trivia night. We lost badly, but I laughed until my cheeks hurt. For once, my laughter didn't have an echo of, "You should be saving that energy for something that matters." When I got home, I sat on the couch, turned on the lamp, and thought, this is the first weekend of my life where I don't owe them a single thing. Not a call, not a visit, not a dollar, not even a thought if I don't want to. The transfer had been irreversible, and so was the silence that followed. People talk about revenge like it's fire, but what I found that week was ice. Clear, solid, permanent. I hadn't screamed. I hadn't begged. I hadn't fought. I'd paid. And in paying, I'd finally, completely walked away. That was execution. The strike, clean and final. Next came the aftermath, the quiet that followed, and what it meant to finally, truly be free. The first week after I sent the transfer, my life felt strange. Not loud, not chaotic, just quiet. Too quiet, almost. It was like walking into a room where a TV had been blaring for hours, then suddenly shut off. At first your ears ring, expecting sound. Then you realize that the ringing is just your body adjusting to silence. Every morning, I'd wake up and check my phone out of habit. Usually there'd be at least a text from my mother, a reminder about money disguised as small talk. "Good morning, sweetie. Hope you're doing well. Have you thought about sending something home?" Or a voicemail from my father, his voice sharp even when he was pretending to be calm, just following up. Don't make us keep asking. But now, nothing. Just the ordinary spam texts about car warranties and sale flyers from stores I'd shopped at once. At first, I kept refreshing my inbox like maybe the block would glitch and let something slip through. Nothing did. My silence was complete, engineered, final. And yet, in those first days, I still heard them in my head. I'd pour myself a second cup of coffee and catch the phantom whisper, "That's 2 cups, that adds up." Or I'd take a long shower and imagine my mother outside the door, sighing. Hot water isn't free. It wasn't them. It was the imprint they'd left, the ghost of a running tally. The difference now was that I could answer back. In my head, I'd say, "Yeah, and it's already paid." By the second week, the anxiety started to ebb. The blocked call notifications slowed down, then stopped altogether. My parents must have realized I wasn't reachable. Not through calls, not through texts, not through emails, not even through relatives. The silence hardened. That's when I noticed something new. Space. Space in my head where their voices had always been. Space in my days where guilt used to live. It was unsettling at first, like an apartment after you've moved out all the furniture. Empty rooms echo. But then I realized emptiness wasn't a loss. It was an invitation. I filled that space slowly. More time at the climbing gym. More weekends spent cooking, trying recipes that weren't just fuel but experiments. Roast chicken with lemon, pasta with homemade sauce, bread that made my apartment smell like warmth itself. I bought a second bookshelf and actually filled it, something I'd never let myself do before because a voice in my head always said, "Books are a waste, rent comes first." But rent was paid. Savings were steady. For the first time in my life, I could spend money without feeling like it chained me to someone else's expectations. Work felt different, too. I'd always been competent, but now I carried a calm I hadn't before. When coworkers stressed about deadlines, I could breathe steady and say, "We'll figure it out." Because I knew what real pressure was. Years of living as an itemized list in someone else's binder. Compared to that, a late shipment or a messy dataset was nothing. My manager noticed. "You're unflappable," he said one day. I almost laughed. If only he knew. Of course, the aftermath wasn't just internal. Word got out through the family grapevine. An aunt messaged me from a number I didn't recognize. Her opening line gave her away. "Your parents are hurt and confused. Why would you shut them out after all they did?" I didn't reply. I didn't need to. I imagined my parents sitting at their kitchen table, binder in front of them, the bank statement pulled up. I imagined them reading that memo line, debt repaid. I imagined their faces, the silence hanging between them. Maybe my father tried to argue it wasn't enough. Maybe my mother tried to spin it as cruelty. Maybe they told the whole family I'd abandoned them. But underneath all that noise, they knew. The money was in their account. The ledger was closed. There was nothing left to demand. One night, I dreamed I was back in their house. The microwave hummed, the binder sat fat and swollen on top. My father flipped it open, but instead of receipts, the pages were blank. He frowned, tapped the paper, asked me where the numbers were. My mother hovered in the doorway, waiting for me to explain. In the dream, I just said, "Check your account." Then I walked out the front door and didn't look back. I woke up smiling. What surprised me most wasn't relief, it was the absence of guilt. I thought I'd feel some echo of it, like when you quit a job without giving 2 weeks' notice, or when you ignore a text from a friend too long. But no, nothing. The guilt was theirs, not mine. And I'd finally handed it back to them in the only currency they respected. I started noticing small things I'd never given myself before. Fresh flowers on the table. A new jacket when the old one started to fray, instead of squeezing out another winter. A vacation, just a weekend trip, a train ride to a city I'd never been. I walked through museums, drank overpriced coffee, took photos of architecture. Nobody leaned over to say, "Do you know how much that cost?" The freedom wasn't loud. It wasn't fireworks or champagne. It was subtle, steady. It was knowing I could live a life without being audited. Sometimes, I caught myself thinking about them. Not with longing, not with anger. More like curiosity, the way you think about a character in a book after you've closed it. Were they sitting in that kitchen, binder useless now? Were they telling neighbors I was ungrateful while quietly enjoying the money? Did they try to rationalize it to themselves? See, he did pay us back. We were right all along. Maybe, but I didn't care, because their story wasn't mine anymore. The aftermath, I realized, wasn't about them at all. It was about me learning to exist without debt as my shadow. About realizing that revenge, when done right, isn't fire, it's closure. One Friday night, I stood at my window with a drink in hand, city lights blinking below, and thought, they wanted me to live my whole life paying them back. But I just ended it with one payment. One clean cut. And now I'm free to spend the rest of my life on myself. That was the aftermath. Not explosive, not cinematic, just peace. But peace has a sharp edge, too. Because in that silence, I could finally hear something I'd been pushing down for years, reflection. It's been months since I hit submit on that transfer, and I've spent a lot of that time relearning what silence feels like. Not just the silence of no phone calls, no guilt-tripping texts, no relatives parroting back their lines. I mean the silence inside. The quiet that comes when you finally strip out a voice that's been narrating your life since before you could form your own. At first, I thought I'd miss it. Not them, exactly, but the routine of it. When you're trained from childhood to brace yourself for someone else's demands, you almost come to expect the sting. Like phantom pain. I'd finish a day at work, walk home with groceries, set them on the counter, and think, this is when the phone would usually buzz. This is when the ledger would come out. This is when I'd be reminded that everything, milk, bread, my very presence, cost too much. But the buzz never came. The ledger stayed shut forever. The only reminders were echoes in my own head, and those grew fainter as weeks stacked on each other. I keep coming back to the phrase they loved most. You owe us everything. They said it so often, it got baked into me. For years, I believed it. I walked around like a man in debt, apologizing for existing, paying interest on every breath. They wanted me to see love as transactional, to believe that parenting was a loan with an interest rate that never stopped climbing. But here's what I know now. Love isn't a ledger. It isn't supposed to be tracked in receipts and late fees. Real parents don't raise children with the expectation of repayment. They give because that's the job. They provide because they want their kid to grow. They don't hold a binder over your head and remind you at every turn that you're draining them dry. I used to envy people who said things like, my parents always had my back, or my mom sacrificed so much without ever asking for anything in return. It felt like they were describing a different planet. But the more I've lived, the more I've realized their normal doesn't diminish mine. I survived something different. And surviving gave me tools most people never have to develop. I know how to live lean. I know how to build structure out of nothing. I know how to turn numbers into safety nets, how to plan 10 steps ahead, how to recognize manipulation hiding under a smile. Those skills didn't erase the damage, but they gave me a foundation. A foundation strong enough that I could look my past in the face, calculate the debt down to the cent, and then pay it on my terms. And that's the part that still makes me smile sometimes, sitting here in my quiet apartment. I gave them exactly what they asked for. They spent my whole childhood telling me it was all a loan, that I'd have to pay them back someday. Well, I did. To the penny. I gave them what they demanded, and not a cent more. What I didn't give them, and what they'll never get, is access to me. To my life, my successes, my failures, my joy, my grief. They don't get the right to call me and pretend pride while slipping in another reminder that I owe them. They don't get to show up at a restaurant booth and act like they're still creditors waiting on payment. They don't get to know me as an adult at all. That's the real revenge. Not the money. Not even the blocking. It's the absence. It's the decision that they're no longer invited to sit at my table, in my head, in my future. I've thought about whether they felt satisfaction when the money landed. Did they sit there, smug, and say, see? We were right all along. He owed us, and he paid. Maybe. But if so, it's hollow satisfaction. Because you can't build a relationship on debt and expect it to last once the balance is zero. And that's what they're left with now, zero. The irony is, by their own rules, I don't owe them anything anymore. They can't demand more without contradicting decades of their own words. We gave you life. You'll pay us back one day. Well, I did. Case closed. Sometimes, on slow evenings, I open my bank app and look at that transaction in my history. $184,326. 17. Memo, debt repaid. I don't look at it with regret. I don't feel bitterness at the money gone. To me, that wasn't a loss. It was a purchase. I bought my freedom. I bought my silence. I bought the right to sit here with a glass of wine, a book open, the city humming outside my window, and know that no one is keeping a tab on me anymore. And the cost? Worth every cent. People ask sometimes on Reddit, in threads like this, what does closure look like? For me, it's not some dramatic confrontation. It's not screaming in their faces, demanding apologies that would never come. It's not waiting for them to admit they were wrong. Closure is a transaction, finished. A receipt stamped, paid in full. Closure is me walking away without leaving a balance behind. Do I wish I'd had different parents? Of course. Do I wish my childhood hadn't been measured in dollars and guilt? Every day? But I can't rewrite that story. What I can do is end it cleanly, decisively, on my terms. Now, when I think about the future, I don't see their shadows on it. I see mine. My choices, my risks, my victories. If I ever have kids of my own, they'll never hear the words, you owe me. They'll never see a binder fat with receipts labeled with their names. They'll know love as something given freely, not loaned out with interest. Because the real legacy I want to leave isn't money. It's freedom. And that's what I have now. Freedom. It doesn't roar. It doesn't shout. It just hums quietly in the background, steady and strong. The silence they left behind isn't empty anymore. It's mine. So here's my story, laid out like a confession, like a Reddit post that probably reads half unbelievable and half too familiar for anyone who's lived with parents like mine. I was raised in debt. I lived years in debt. I paid the debt. And then I walked away. Sometimes the best closure is giving people exactly what they demanded, and nothing more. The rest of my life? That's mine now. Paid in full.